Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So, I wasn't going to do too many more about this, but I thought I found this conversation between Kamali and I think it's the Deputy Secretary of State of Israel, who was on before, I think, on one of the Pursuits of Truth. And it was interesting to hear. I mean, this is the thing, like I always say, and that's the famous maxim of war. The first casualty of war is truth, not soldiers, but truth. And that's because, well, we know all human beings can lie, isn't it? We all have that capacity. And we know in war, it's usually one side versus the other. And usually the sides don't like each other. And that's why it's in their best interest to demonize each other's sides, and which is called propaganda, and also to exaggerate or under-exaggerate numbers. That's the other thing that often comes out. We've seen that through numerous conflicts. This conversation is nothing new. It's not specific to Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians. This is the same conversation, that is about all wars. And this is an example of why wars are so messy and so, well, that is one way to solve a problem. It's the caveman way of solving a problem, the historic way of man solving a problem of, if you won't agree, then I'm going to destroy you, with my club. I don't know. That's how I see it. I mean, I don't like war, but then I understand if I lived in the system that I wanted to live in, where we could get on with each other, and whether that's possible, possible in any sense, or in the sense that because of the way we've come now, the way we've evolved, that maybe it's impossible for us all to live with each other because we're just so used to being separated and divided and looking down on each other and fighting over bits of land and who controls you, because that's what the wars are all about. Because at the end of the day, the generals, politicians get civilians to go and fight for them while they sit in their offices and they defend their actions. But it's the civilians, that are going out as soldiers to fight their wars. I don't know, it seems like the most stupid thing to be in fighting something that you're not really you're concerned about, but they make it your concern because that's patriotism. That's the importance of that, keeping inside that box, not seeing each other as human beings, as families, as brothers and sisters, mothers and daughters, and all that stuff. I guess to be a soldier must be like being like a doctor, where you have to remove your emotion, because if you had emotion, like say Wilfred Owen or something, to see, other family members, even if they are your enemy, being destroyed, to know that maybe, depending on how your government works and how, necessary things are, you may have a choice to make of like, there's one important general or three terrorists, and they're surrounded by a family or surrounded by whatever. Your intention is to only strike that terrorist. But how much concern is given for what Americans termed collateral damage? I believe it was them. What is given for the concern of those civilians that are of the other side is given. And that's, I think, because that comes up in this Sky News thing, where Kamali is asking about, the 17,000 children that have died. And the problem is they're quoting, and this is what was interesting about this, because I've come to think about this more recently in these later pursuits of the truth. And you see, that's how you can tell that, we're on a journey and things change and we change. We can't be held for the things of the past, but we must strive for the future, a better future. But, what's interesting is how, we taken for granted, because it's on Sky News saying this is 56,000 deaths. Well, but what's the breakdown of those? How many of them are Hamas soldiers? How many are women and children who, you could say, or at least with the children under, say, 18, you could say they're not part of Hamas, or, but the question is like, well, where's this number coming from? This number's coming from Hamas. Because at the beginning of the conflict, we used to get numbers from the UN as well. And they always used to say that the UN numbers were very similar to the Hamas numbers. So we could say that usually after a conflict, when the numbers add up, the UN numbers do normally tally. But of course, we don't know whether those numbers, whether that's even ever been historically accurate or not. Because as usual, it's all about trust. We're trusting media, we're trusting the UN, we're trusting people, soldiers, we're trusting politicians, we're trusting statisticians. We're trusting all these people to come to us to tell the truth. And the problem is in war, that goes out the window. Because if you have a stat that shows that you are killing more children than you're killing Hamas soldiers, that's a big problem. It's something where, that could mean that the Americans or the Europeans or UN or whoever could get behind, war crimes or ethnic cleansing or genocide claims, or the ICC or the ICJ or things like that. So there would be a benefit to keeping quiet about these things. And this is nothing about Israel or even Hamas. Even, we know, because we see all the time how governments, even like the ones that we put on pedestals, like Europe or UK or America, we see all the time where politicians, where people working for politicians in government, where businessmen, or anyone has been withholding things or not bringing things forward. We've seen like the blood scandal, we've seen Primados, we've seen the vaginal mesh thing. What was the other one? The post office. There's nothing new about this. This is to do with, that's like I say, why I started at the beginning, that the problem is that humans can lie. And that's the problem. And that, so there will be reasons why both, Hamas are going to want to, they're a small terrorist organization. They're going to want to exaggerate the amount of children that have died. All of them are going to focus on children, because since the Iraq and Afghanistan war, that's been the key, let's show how many children have been killed by Saddam Hussein or Iraq, and then we can say that, well, that's justification to go to war, because it gets to the heartstrings. Because to go to war is not just about, especially in this day and age where everyone is a journalist because we all have cameras, it's about justification. It's about we're the good guys, we're not the bad guys, because we're going to use that argument against the other side. But of course, the thing is, if you were watching TV in Iran, you'd be seeing a different news broadcast. If you're watching it in America, or if you're watching wherever, you're going to get different sides depending on which, sides of countries are on. And so that does make it very difficult in the pursuit of truth, to quote it, to know, how do we know which side is telling the truth? Are Hamas exaggerating the numbers? I suspect they probably are, because it's in their best interest. They don't have a military like Israel. They don't have backing like the USA. They have Iran. And look, we didn't see very much from them, or Russia. We didn't see very much to them other than old weapons, so that's why they want to play at the heartstrings of us watching TV, of seeing, look how terrible it is. And it does make me question now whether can we trust the media to deliver, are they concerned that they are getting information from Hamas? Should they maybe be getting information about casualties? Is it only, who's counting the bodies? I mean, I've always long believed this, how do they actually know how many bodies? Do they actually, because a lot of them are under rubble, are they guessing like this is a house and it had 5 people in it? Do they know exactly how many people were in there? Are they just putting an average? How is that stat being worked out? Because I know with stats, we know that maxim, lies, damn lies, and statistics. So I suspect that number is exaggerated. But how exaggerated it is, because that makes the big important, because Sky News are using that number. He's quoting 17,000 children, when you're quite well knowing that's probably exaggerated. And it makes a big difference, because if it was only 9,000, well, that may be within the norms of a normal conflict. I don't know. I guess the problem is, to most people, any child is too many. And that should be the way it is. But we know within war. But then that's why I would have asked the question, not about... because we know of collateral damage. We know that even if you were the well-intentioned, you're only going to attack someone, you may accidentally. Now, it depends on that accidentally. How is that? that accidental, for it to be an accident, you mustn't know that those people are going to be there. That would be what I would try and clarify, is it that, a specific event that they agree upon where, some terrorists got killed and there were, say, 10 civilians that we're saying were definitely not part of Hamas. Maybe there was like 5 children in there. Are we saying that when you launch that bomb to drop on them, assuming it wasn't a gun, because if it was a gun, you could see the children. So I'm assuming it was a bomb or a drone. When that bomb was dropped on them, did they have knowledge that there were children there? Because if they had knowledge there were children there, that's not an accident. And of course, we've seen footage of drones when they film themselves, dropping bombs on people. We've seen the WikiLeaks Iraq and Afghanistan shooting at people. We've seen all that. So they film themselves, and the drones film, I guess because they want confirmation of hits. So we know that they do that. So if they did have that knowledge, then that's not an accident. The thing is, like, if it's like the cases, and you could get away with this, say it's a school or a hospital, like we've seen some of the strikes, which is questionable because of the international law side of it, but of course it is also questionable if they're not being used as those things, then they are free to be attacked, my understanding of the law. I don't know if that's correct. If that is the case, then that would give them justification to do it. But it depends how do you get to make sure that, well, if the hospital is still being used as a hospital, then it is still a hospital. But if there's no one in it, no doctors, then yeah, that's not a hospital anymore and it can be attacked, I guess. But I don't think that's the case. So, but the thing is, if it's like someone's house or it's a school, and you see 2 terrorists walk in, are you able to make sure who's actually inside that big building with a drone? And that's where they could say, well, that's an accident because we didn't know there were 15 children in there. But the thing is that is it an accident, or is it like, I don't have too much concern over, if I do, I'm more concerned about getting rid of these 2 soldiers. And maybe in war you don't have time because you're waiting for that hit. I mean, it'd be better if you wait for them to come outside. But maybe you don't have time to be able to go and check, inside. So maybe we're putting on them things that, is impossible in war, and that is something that when you've declared a whole country your enemy, I suppose, because we're now in a different age. In the past, you did do that, isn't it? Like when, I guess, Churchill dropped bombs on Dresden, I guess he didn't get a very big backlash from the British public that he did it to allow, my history reminding me that he did it to allow time for him to build more planes because we were getting hit by them. So he shifted that, if that's true. But I suspect there wasn't much of a hoo-ha back in Britain saying, oh, you killed civilians. I don't know. But now we live in a different time where we get to see these things and we're more open to the whole world, and we're all, enjoying things together. We're aware of each other, and each other's aware of us and what we do. So therefore, maybe it's because war is old, and especially the way war is fought is difficult. But I suppose, like with technology now, maybe with cameras and X-ray and night vision and all that kind of stuff, maybe you can see heat energy of children in the building, so you could say that, no, it's an accident or not an accident. So I think that was the point that it should have been clarified, because we know that, you could accidentally kill someone. We understand that. And we know, I don't think it is intentional. I don't think, normal governments don't usually do things intentionally. I don't think they set out to think that, we're going to kill the children of Palestine. I don't think that. That's more like a terrorist thing. And I know that could play into arguments of these things. And I guess terrorists probably don't see themselves as terrorists, as freedom fighters. But I suppose we can only judge people by their actions and what they do. And obviously kidnapping people is not something that is, it's against international law. And it's not something that we'd expect a good army to be doing. If you were taking them as prisoners, that's a different thing. But of course, that has to be combatants, not civilians. But I guess they might consider people in kibbutz and those around those areas and settlers and all that kind of stuff. I don't know too much about that, but they would probably make some kind of argument over that. But Isn't it? This is the thing, like, it's just so frustrating. We're just all human beings. Why do we have to see it this way? Why do we have to, like, fall into this man-made trap of the box that we found ourselves in? Because, like I say before, if you're born of twins, one baby is in Israel, one's in Palestine, you're both going to grow up to hate each other by the surroundings because of the place and the time. And yet you were once, if you had been together, you would have loved each other. I mean, it's so frustrating to see humanity fighting each other over what? Over what? Over what? What are we fighting over? What is Israel, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine? You know, in the Second World War, Hitler and the Allies, what were they all fighting for? And I know sometimes because, yeah, I guess in the system that we live in, sometimes countries have to defend, have to attack when they've been attacked. I get that. But stripping all that away and justification and all that from a God view, what human being wearing different suits with different ideas in their brain that, depending where they're born, is where it comes, it's been moulded. What are they actually really fighting for? What was Hitler fighting for? What was the Nazis fighting for? What were the Allies fighting for? What was Vietnam fighting for? What was Israel, Gaza fighting for? There's only usually two things, unless I'm wrong. And the two things are land and control. Land and control. That's what all wars are really about, no? When you actually boil it down. I know there's nuances to that, and there's arguments and this, that, and the other, and the system that we live within, because we're segregating, we see each other differently, and segregation I mean by humanity. But it's really about, you know, bits of land. I want this bit of land to be mine. You want, and this side wants this bit of land to be mine, and only my people in there. And like with Hitler, say he wanted to have the whole of the Europe as his empire, you know, like in the old days. So this land. It's land that we can't take with us. How silly we are as individuals to follow people that want to just occupy bits of land. But why do they want to occupy bits of land? Because the main reason, and maybe there is actually only this one reason, it's all about control. You know, I want to be the one to control you. Because we're all subject to control, isn't it? Because that's what democracy, that's what governments are. They govern us. We elect them to govern us, to make those hard decisions for us. We don't make them all as a collective. We have this system that these people will. And so these people, you know, like the Hitlers, like whoever, that's what they want. They want that to control these people. And all these people have to follow me. If you don't follow me, you have to die. And that's what war is. But how silly are we to as individuals to fight for that? To choose that. At the end of the day, you're choosing, you know, so in Russia and Ukraine, you know, either it's if Vladimir Putin wins, he'll control all of Russia and Ukraine, he'll be your leader. If Vladimir Zelensky, then he will be your leader. And yeah, I get, you know, from the system that we live within, you know, that's important because it depends on, you know, if one of them is, you know, a terrible leader and doesn't do good for his people, and one of them is a very good leader and does do good for his people, that's why you'd want that person to win, and that's why we fight wars. I get that, and that's the justification. But I don't know, it always seems to be like there's one bad side, one good side. It's very sort of Orwellian in that, isn't it? But yeah, but at the end of the day, as individuals, that's all it's about. It's about who controls you. But yeah, when I boil it down to that, obviously I see that it is important who controls you, because if we're going to have to be controlled, which is a questionable system that, you know, I don't know whether that's really working for all humanity, but maybe we do need people to make decisions, because how would we all live together without a leader? I don't know. I don't know if there's any philosophical answers to that. But that's the way we have always been. You're going to want a leader who does best for humanity, does best for you. But it's just so frustrating that, you know, we have a finite amount of time. We only live once, you know? And depending where you live, you know, if I was saying this in you know, one country, I could be arrested for my views, or I could be here where I'm safe. And that, I guess that's why people would say, well, that's why we fight. Yeah, and I get that. That's because that's the system that we live within. But I don't think we should live in that system, because I think we should live in a system where we don't have to make that decision, where we live as we truly intrinsically are. We're all human beings. We're all humanity. We're brothers and sisters of each other. We're one. This is our home. It isn't these small bits of land. Our home is this place, what we normally call the earth. This is where we all are. This is our home. And these are our neighbours. And we are brothers and sisters of each other. And we've been given a chance to live, to be able to breathe that fresh air, to see that beautiful landscape of all around earth, to have all the resources we could possibly need if we use them wisely, to have everything, and have all the mind power and communication to be able to develop all the bits of free stuff, the minerals, the flowers, the trees, everything that we've come across to make computers and technology and buildings and hospitals and medicine to help, make us well. All these things free, but some man back in the past, or person, put price tags on it and cut it up and said, no, this is mine, this is yours, and now forever we're going to fight each other for the same thing that we're all given freely when we were born on this planet that nobody owns, that was given to us, if you believe in God, as our home. I don't know. But anyway, here's the interview. I thought it was quite interesting. It was quite infuriating in some points. You'll hear me shouting in the background. But it just, it doesn't even matter. It's not... You don't even need to look at it from the point of Israel, Gaza, Palestine. This is just human beings. This is what we're seeing. Because this is just like one side. If you saw the other side, they'd be saying the same things and making the reverse arguments. And if you pick a different conflict or a different war in a different place, you get the same people who will say the same things. This is something that just to keep regurgitating is going to keep happening because of the system that we live within. Anyway, I don't know. I know I've waffled on longer than the actual thing. Here it is. Take care, take it easy. God bless and peace.
Thanks for that, Leah. Now, more than 70 people were killed yesterday by Israeli fire in Gaza, many of them at a beachfront cafe. Well, that cafe was popular with journalists and students because it offered reliable internet access, and it was crowded when it was hit in an Israeli airstrike. Well, here in the UK, the BBC is facing more questions over why chants of death to the IDF at Glastonbury were streamed live. Pleased to say we're now joined by Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskell. Deputy Foreign Minister, thanks very much for being with us this morning. We do appreciate you taking the time. So the police are investigating what happened at Glastonbury. As you will know, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, said at the weekend that he was appalled by what he saw at the festival. But he also said that the Israeli embassy needs to get its own house in order, citing what's happening in Gaza and in the West Bank. What did you make of those comments?
Well, I have to say, obviously it's disappointing that every time something outrageous, like those anti-Semitic calls, death calls, violent calls, needs to be somehow balanced politically. Because, and I understand, I'm a politician as well, the voters, and to please the voters, and many politicians are worried about their seats, but I don't think it's just disappointing to us. I think the first thing they should think about, is what's right. And in that case, in such a case of anti-Semitism, a violent call of death, genocidal calls, I think it should have been far more obvious.
Minister, he did roundly condemn it, as many people here on all sides of the political spectrum have. Let's just play the clip from Mr. Streeting at the weekend, and we'll talk again off the back.
I'd also say to the Israeli embassy, get your own house in order in terms of the conduct of your own citizens and the settlers in the West Bank. I think there's a serious point there by the Israeli embassy I take seriously. I wish they'd take the violence of their own citizens towards Palestinians more seriously.
So continuing to condemn there, but also talking about settler violence, what's your response to that?
Well, as I said, it's very sad. I think that if politician thinks that they need to somehow, when they're calling racism outright, to somehow balance it to please a political crowd or some of their voters. I think it's sad. It's disappointing.
I mean, Ms. Haskell, he may well believe what he's saying. It may not be a politically expedient. He may well think that while it was abhorrent what happened at Glastonbury, there also needs to be more focus on what's happening in both Gaza and the West Bank. He also specifically referred to Israeli settler terrorists. Those are the words that he used. The UN's humanitarian office said that 850 Palestinians and 40 Israelis have died in the occupied West Bank since the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October, 3 in Kafr Malik just last week. Does Israel have a settler terrorist problem?
Look, first thing, I think that with such calls, anti-Semitic calls, and somehow it's been normalized in British society, I think the last thing, should be done is to somehow making any kind of comparisons or any kind of something that might imply for justification for violent calls or racist calls at a festival. That's the first thing. If you want to talk to me about the actual case of what is happening, we've condemned it, the government, almost everybody have condemned it. This is something that shouldn't happen, but that happens on the margins and the extreme, okay? This is a very, very rare case of what had happened, and Israel, as a Western democracy with an independent judicial system, a very robust judicial system. If someone broke the law, they were arrested, people will be persecuted, and they will have to pay for a crime they committed. Any crime. And it doesn't matter whether they're Muslims or Jewish or Christian or Bedouins. Israel is ruled by the rule of law. And as you've seen, the Israeli judicial system is a very, very strong one and very independent one, and we take it very seriously. To try and take such an extreme, unique case that is extremely rare and somehow put it in another sentence that might sound like it's justifying a cause in England, that are anti-Semitic calls, genocidal calls, outrageous death calls. I think it's not just unjust, but it's shameful.
Ms. Haskell, as you say, it has been condemned by the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu condemned by the President as well. What happened, Yair Lapid also said that the most serious threat to Israel doesn't come from Iran or Yemen, but from within us. You've said that there will be action taken on this. Just what will that look like? Will there be more arrests made? It's reported that the individuals involved in the killings in Kafr Malik were arrested and released.
Well, first of all, as I said, Israel has the rule of law, and everybody are equal in front of the law in Israel, no matter what religion you're in or what race you're from. It doesn't matter. You will be judged by the judicial system exactly the same as anyone else.
I'm sure Palestinians would disagree with that characterization, though, of the way the law works.
Well, you might disagree with that, but the fact is, that's the reality in Israel. The fact is that Israel has one of the most robust judicial systems in the world, where it wasn't afraid of an Arab Supreme Court judge in the Israeli court to judge a former president of the state of Israel. So that's the proof of how strong and independent is our judicial system. So I understand the propaganda that you might receive from some extreme organizations, but the reality is different. You just need to open your eyes and look at the facts. Now,
Ms. Haskell, he's an elected government minister. That was the point that he made, not propaganda coming from West Region.
Look, that case of violence was so extreme, okay? It was so extreme, and that's why you're reporting it. This is not something that happens every day. We condemn it. We will prosecute this. If there was any offense, and it looks like there was, I will let the judicial system deal with it like it has dealt with it before many times in many different cases.
Okay, let's move on to the situation in Gaza. As we've been reporting in the past 24 hours, 70 people reported to have been killed in strikes, many of them at that beachside cafe. What steps have been taken to avoid innocent people being killed in the ongoing war?
So the first thing, I'll be very careful in reporting unverified reports. This reports come straight from the mouth of a terrorist organization, Hamas, from Hamas's Ministry of Health. Now, in the cases of the last 3 weeks, many events like that were proven to be Hamas's propaganda.
Which events in particular? Sorry, Ms. Haskell. Which events in particular are proven to be propaganda?
There were many events. I was actually.
Can you name one?
I was interviewed with you just, I think it was 4 weeks ago, when you put me online about a certain accusation about an event inside a humanitarian zone or in the humanitarian distribution centers. I was literally 3 minutes after you put the headline there, and about 3 hours later, it was reported that that was absolutely fake. So that happens, okay? Now, and you've apologized for it as well. It happens, I understand. Sometimes you take the headlines from Hamas's Ministry of Health, which is a terrorist organization. In this particular case, the IDF is investigating in, because it's not verified yet. It's very difficult to share some information, but you know what? I have some information who hasn't come out yet, and I can tell you that it looks like this strike was actually targeting a commander of the naval force of Hamas with 8 of his terrorists. Now, we are still looking into the details because the media is spreading a lot of misinformation also about damage, the amounts of civilians and anything like that. So we need to verify that in depth. And once it's verified, I'll be briefed about it and I can share that information with you more accurately.
Ms. Haskell, we really appreciate that. You're referring to a conversation that I had with my colleague Trevor about a month ago about an attack in Rafah at a food distribution centre where at least 50 people were said to have been killed, hundreds injured, who went to then a Red Cross hospital. And specifically on these food distribution centres.
You've apologized for it because what you've reported wasn't accurate.
Okay. Specifically on these distribution centres, there's been reporting in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that says IDF soldiers were told to shoot at people waiting for food at these sites. Why was that order being given by commanders to soldiers?
Well, first of all, I'll be careful with things that Haaretz is actually writing about. This is a very extreme left-wing newspaper who in
Haaretz is an extreme left-wing newspaper.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It is a extreme left-wing newspaper, and in many times they've apologized for quite a few reports that they actually put in. We don't know of any case of it, but because they've reported it, we started investigating into it. But, you know, many of these blood libels that are being spread about the IDF are rubbish. The Prime Minister said and declared that also afterwards. And just to be on the safe side, we are going through our entire staffs, okay, in Gaza to make sure if there's any case of such reporting or such command, which
Ms. Haskell, you will acknowledge, though, that people have been killed since the Guardian Humanitarian Foundation began those food distribution sites, those 4 sites. People have been killed while waiting for food, haven't they?
Look, you need to understand, we are at war. Gaza Strip is a front line, a military front line with dozens, if not hundreds of operations against terrorists and a terrorist organization that is hiding behind humans. Just last week, they put a bounty on the heads of any worker of the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, meaning their life is in danger at any second when they are distributing food. They have targeted a whole bus of workers of the Humanitarian Fund and killed 5 workers. You need to understand that those conditions in a war are extreme. We are fighting
Ms. Haskell, but I'm sure you would.
Which is goal is to have as much destruction as possible, so there's going to be pressure on Israel.
But I'm sure you would agree that that does not in any way justify the killing of civilians. 17,000 children have died in Gaza since the Hamas attacks of October the 7th and the Israeli response. Now, just on the shootings at distribution sites, and
let's talk first about the number that you said, which is exaggerated, and no, from research.
How many children have been killed?
That was published not by Israel,
how many children have been killed?
How that these numbers are inflatable.
Do you have a number as to how many children have been killed?
Look, there isn't a war that is clean. There isn't a war where children were not killed. Unfortunately, a war is a thing.
And
It's
these
a
numbers?
terrible thing. It's a
Okay.
terrible thing that we never
Most certainly.
wanted. In fact, we did everything in our capability to not have it. We
What about
provided
two-state
almost
solution,
17
like stops
times
it,
the
no?
opportunity for
Giving
Hamas
back
to
land
go
from
into a
1967.
ceasefire, and they refused. Just in the last 3 months, there were 2 proposals on the tables that
Not for
Israel
Hamas,
said
but for the
yes, and
Palestinian
Hamas
people.
refuses to that ceasefire. 2 weeks ago, Witkoff went a few more steps towards the demands of Hamas. Israel said yes to a ceasefire. Hamas hasn't replied yet. This war is on the responsibility of Hamas. This is a death cult that is using and shields. They are hiding rockets and tunnels and military headquarters in hospitals and schools, and it is very difficult to conduct a war against such a terrorist organization.
Yes,
Is
that point-
Israel
Ms. Haskell,
targeting
yes, that point's
civilian
made.
on purpose? Absolutely not.
But
There
is it
is not a
making
chance in the world
concern
that
or
Israel
care
is purposely
if it
targeting
does
civilian.
kill civilians,
Is
or
there
civilians are around
casualties?
all these Hamas
Yes.
soldiers?
And is there mistakes? In a war, there's unfortunately mistakes.
What
We
will
live in
happen when this war is
finally-
over? Sorry, when this war is over, what will happen to those that have been found to have been responsible for the, as you say,
What happened to
unfortunate
all the
civilian
ones in Iraq
deaths?
and Afghanistan that committed war
Well,
crimes?
first of
Probably
all,
nothing.
I'll repeat it because I don't think you got it. Israel doesn't target civilian. When you hear Iran, blasting in its speeches that it targets civilian on purpose, the bigger the destruction, the more civilian die. Iran, it's strategy. Israel's different. We do not target civilian. We target terrorists. We target a death cult that is
Lots of-
committed to the
Ms.
obliteration of our people and the genocide of our people.
Lots of civilians have been killed as a result of the response.
Unfortunately, civilians were killed unintentionally when we were trying to fight that death cult that is using them as
Well,
human
let's move on to
shields.
my
And
final
that's a big
question then.
difference, and you need to understand that.
Minister, I do understand that. But let's move on to my final question then, because I can assure you I do understand how difficult it must be to fight a war like this. But what the point I'm making is that too many civilians, as been reported, have now died as a result. Now,
But whose responsibility
Trump-
is that? Would Hamas take a ceasefire? Would those
well,
civilians?
I want to ask you about that now, because President Trump.
Israel accepted over and over again a ceasefire where Hamas is refusing. It's using that pressure to try and look. You need to understand. When you're fighting Hamas, a jihadist terrorist organization, their greatest achievement is to die as a martyr. They are proud of it. This is not a civilized organization. These are people who don't believe in the same moral. They don't have the same moral compass as me and you, who cherish life, who value life, who fight for life. They're fighting for death. And that makes a whole lot of difference. They are using their population as a tool of war. This is on their responsibility.
Minister, let me move on to the final question. President Trump is due to meet Prime Minister Netanyahu next week. You've talked about the process ongoing. I think the Egyptians are involved as well in this stage. President Trump has called for there to be ceasefire. How close are the two sides now to agreeing terms, and what comes next after, hopefully, a ceasefire is signed?
Well, that's the thing, Hamas's logic is very different. And so it's very difficult to deal with a terrorist organization whose greatest achievement is death. There's been a couple of proposals on the table we've been discussing, including a ceasefire just, it's now more than 2 weeks ago, that we've said yes as well. In the long term, I think it's very reasonable, the demands that we've put since the start of the war. The fact is that if those demands would have been met even almost 2 years ago, there wouldn't have been a war. And that's the first thing, is to bring back our family members who are being held in the dungeons of torture of Hamas for almost 2 years, being abused, starved. And the other one is that Hamas lay down their weapons. This is a death cult who's committed the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, who said they'll repeat the 7th of October over and over again. My children will never be safe if they continue to rule in power in Gaza and continue to build their military power for our destruction. This is their goal.
Okay.
So I think those two are very reasonable demands, especially after everything we've been through. I hope we're closer. I mean, Trump has put in the past enough pressure on Hamas, including pressure on Hezbollah, to force them to a ceasefire. And I really hope we'll be able to do it again.
Sorry to interrupt, but we've run out of time. But Sharon Haskell, Deputy Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring the footage from
The
that.
Israeli military has acknowledged that Palestinian civilians have been harmed at aid distribution sites in Gaza and issued new guidance to its forces. That development comes after at least 74 people were killed on the Strip yesterday, including up to 30 at a popular beachfront cafe frequented by journalists and students. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi now reports.
The talks about resuming ceasefire negotiations might as well be happening on another planet. In Gaza, the grim reality remains unchanged. It's been another day of relentless violence and a rising death toll. This was a beachfront cafe in Gaza City and was full of people when it was struck. It was one of the few remaining places with a reliable internet connection. At least 22 people were killed here, according to medical responders.
Forget red lines, we're past that. Nothing left to say. Look around. All I see is blood. Men, martyrs, limbs, unbelievable. People come here to rest, get some internet, take a break from what they see inside Gaza. They come westward to breathe.
Of course, we don't know, it could be Hamas. And
Among the
that
dead,
could be-
Franz al-Salmi, who was a well-known artist, and Ismail Abu Khattab, a photojournalist. More than 50 people were also injured in the strike. These images, taken moments after the blast, show Palestinian journalist Bayan Abu Sultan. She's covered in blood and visibly dazed. Over the past 24 hours, Israeli airstrikes have intensified, some of the heaviest bombardments in weeks. They follow new evacuation orders in northern Gaza, triggering yet another wave of displacement. The horror in Gaza plays out in slow motion, each day bringing new funerals. Civilians exhausted, starving and terrified can only endure as international efforts to broker a ceasefire once again appear to be gathering pace.
Remember, Hamas don't wear uniforms.
For civilians, though, trapped with nowhere to escape the bombs, a diplomatic breakthrough feels unbearably distant. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Meanwhile, Oxfam and over 100 other organisations operating in Gaza have called for an immediate end to the joint Israeli-US aid distribution scheme in Gaza. They say the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation should now be replaced by the UN-led operation. 400 aid distribution points operating during the temporary ceasefire across Gaza have now been replaced by just 4 military-controlled distribution sites, which they say forces 2 million people into overcrowded militarised zones where they face daily gunfire. They said the following in a statement: "Today, Palestinians in Gaza face an impossible choice: starve or risk being shot, while desperately trying to reach food to feed their families." The weeks following the launch of the Israeli distribution scheme have seen some of the deadliest and most violent since October 2023. In less than 4 weeks, more than 500 Palestinians have been killed and almost 4,000 injured just trying to access or distribute food. Israeli forces and armed groups, some reportedly operating with backing from Israeli authorities, now routinely open fire on desperate civilians. Well, meanwhile, US officials say the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet Donald Trump on Monday. The visit follows comments from Mr. Trump suggesting a Gaza ceasefire would be possible within a week. Let's bring in our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark. Michael, has Benjamin Netanyahu gone on his own volition, or has he been summoned back to the White House?
I suspect the latter, which is partly why the Israelis are pushing very, very hard. I mean, they're attacking into western Gaza City, into Khan Yunis and Rafah in the last 24 hours because they're doing what militaries always do. They're grabbing as much territory before they're told they have to stop. which suggests that Netanyahu would be very skeptical about a ceasefire, but he may find that one is imposed upon him by Trump. And what Trump is offering is an interesting sort of package. He's saying, okay, the idea is return of all of the hostages, withdrawal of most Israeli forces, except for a couple of areas, probably the Netzarim corridor and the Philadelphia corridor, those areas they feel they have to control.
Well, the money is.
The beginning of some sort of meaningful discussion about the future of Gaza, which there hasn't been so far. And interestingly, that Israel have got to drop all charges against Benjamin Netanyahu. This is Trump. Again, no respect for the law or due process. Just stop it. Stop witch hunting the poor man who's on these corruption charges that go back over 10 years, because that's part of that will sugar the pill for Netanyahu. I will make your justice system drop all charges against you. You've got to go along with this. It's also part of a much bigger approach that Trump is taking. He's talking about bringing Syria into the Abraham Accords process. So get Syria to normalize the new Syria, where sanctions have been lifted by the Americans. Good idea. Get them on board with Israel. But of course, Israel occupies parts of Syria. They're sitting
further into.
They're Mount Hermon. They're on Mount Hermon. They're in Deraa. They're in the triangle between Jordan, Israel, and Syria, that little triangle itself. So already Israeli forces are in Syria for their own reasons, but bring Syria in, then bring the Saudis into the Abraham Accords. I mean, this doesn't lack for ambition. And so President Trump is trying to do a big deal with lots of moving parts. Now, to professionals, this looks really naive, but who's to say it won't work? Because there are so many moving parts. It just might be that on the basis of the Iran issue, which is now moving into different territory, the Iranian-Israeli antagonism, possibly, maybe this is the moment for a big imaginative push to remake the Middle East. And the beginning of that will be a ceasefire in Gaza. That's what the Americans are thinking. I'm not going to hold my breath on any of this.
No, and you think of the months preceding October the 7th, 2023, Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to reform, reimagine the Supreme Court. There was huge mass demonstrations against that. Ultimately, it got shelved and it got derailed. And you think of all the years before, there was, 6 elections in 4 years, the best part of?
That's right.
You can hardly think that the Israeli populace will stand the leader of another country thousands of miles away trying to overrule the justice system in their own country.
You wouldn't think so, would you? But that's not the way it may look to the White House. Because, I mean, Netanyahu is an wily old bird. He's been there 20 years. He's a natural autocrat. And Trump likes autocrats. He just likes the power and the decisiveness. There's hardly anybody more indecisive than Netanyahu, who just his strategy is to get to the end of the week, to survive week after week after week in power. But nevertheless, this seems to be, I mean, I don't think Trump likes Netanyahu, but he recognizes that through Netanyahu is maybe the key to a peace deal in Gaza. If Trump could engineer a reasonably sustainable peace in Gaza, reasonably sustainable, then he's a bit nearer to his Nobel Peace Prize, which is what this is really all about.
Well, that was the words I was about to write down on a piece of paper, because, let's be honest,
Nobel Peace Prize and the statue at Mount Rushmore for extending the territory of the United States, physically extending the territory to Greenland. That gets him, in his view, that gets him a statue on Mount Rushmore, along with the other 4 great presidents.
I don't know if I can go with this at 10:29 on Tuesday morning, but that is the US president. I'm going to hear actually from the US president later. Today, he's going to be talking about the alligator Alcatraz. It's going to be about 12:15. We're going to hear about some remarkable proposals that are going to take place in the US. Stick with us for that. Also, stick with us for the weather.